He's a local author from Greensburg, went to Greensburg Central Catholic School, Duquesne for college, lives in Monroeville, has written almost 40 books about Pittsburgh sports mostly. Pirates, Penguins, Steelers, Pitt basketball, Pitt football, Duquesne basketball with the Chuck Cooper family actually hired David to write the book about Chuck Cooper, who made the news here a lot in the past year with the building of the Cooper Field House and being the first person of color to play in the NBA and be in the Hall of Fame and all that. But books about Forbes Field, Nolan Arena, debatable books. He's written things like the 50 greatest Steeler games, and the 50 greatest Pirate games, and the 50 greatest Penguin games, which are all debatable. The 500 greatest sports figures in Pittsburgh was a book of his. My favorite, when the Stoney's Brewery asked him to write a book for them called Roll Out the Stonies. It's all about Jones Brewing down in Smithton. Kind of interesting, local establishment, so to speak. He has a podcast called The 412. You can pick it up on Facebook, Twitter, I believe. He's on Facebook. That's how I met Dave, actually. When you're on Facebook, you can things will pop up and say, people you may know. This David Finoli kept popping up. And I'm like, that name sounds halfway familiar. I have a book by him. Clicked on him, friended him. He friended me back, friended my wife back. Sue has the account. I don't. I just troll on her. But in 2018, he was Pittsburgh Magazine's Best of the Burg Local Author of the Year. Written almost 40 books. He's with the group called Gentlemen Writers or something like that in Pittsburgh. They write a bunch of different books. He's contributed to Pittsburgh Magazine, Baseball Digest, the Pirates Game Day program, Alumni Magazine. When he was writing a book called Pittsburgh Sports First, he was able to determine that the University of Pittsburgh was the first collegiate team to wear uniforms. The NCAA always said it was somebody else. So that had to be pretty cool to just tell the NCAA you're wrong.
They ignored me.
They ignored you?
Yeah, but I said of the quote from the Pittsburgh paper.
Okay, okay. So, and through his research for the book, when Pitt ruled the gridiron, he was able to legitimize their 1936 national championship. So, the man is a wealth of Pittsburgh sports knowledge. I think we will enjoy him. He has called his talk Highs and Lows of Western Pennsylvania Sports. Gentlemen, I give you David Finoli.
All right. I have a little frog in my throat, so I was afraid I couldn't make it there. I assume you are all sports fans, so you know with it is highs and lows of sports. You know, I started my sports fandom with quite a few lows. My grandfather owned a bar in Ludwig section of Greensburg, Fury Tavern, and he had the Tops man who would come to his bar often, the guy who would sell Tops cards to the grocery stores and such. So I guess I was kind of a freak when I was 7, 8 years old. My grandfather would put me on the bar, turn the card around and ask the guy to ask me the question on the back of the cards that they always have, and I would answer it. He would give me a box of cards, which was filled with lots of packs, which I began my love of sports memorabilia. And I always loved the guy back in the late 60s by the name of Jerry Koosman. So So I would collect his cards whenever I could, his rookie card especially. And on the other end of his rookie card was a gentleman named Nolan Ryan. Well, in the 80s, this card was worth 4 digits. And I kept going home and asking my mother. I was at Duquesne at the time, and I wanted a card for school. So I would continually ask her, Mom, I got about 11 to 12 of these cards. Where are they? She goes, they're there. So she finally asked me after badgering her one day, why do you need these cards? I said, well, the guy's going to give me $6,000 for them, and I want to buy a car. And her face turned white. It was then I realized just how evil my mom was. She threw away all my cards.
Oh!
Yes, especially those. So, until the day she died, I'd always mention that to her. Mom, remember when you threw away $6,000 of cards? And she gave me a little smack in the head. So, that began that. And to begin my love of baseball, in 1969 I saw my first game at Shea Stadium. This also began a love-hate relationship with traffic. My Uncle Ed, who was just a wonderful human being and took me to several of my first sporting events, baseball, I'm a soccer fan, took me to a closed-circuit World Cup final in '74, took me to my first closed-circuit boxing matches, which developed my love of boxing. But in 1969, he took me to Shea Stadium. I was about 8, 9 at the time. And, Uncle Ed hated traffic. So I had no concept of 69 Mets. I just knew him at this team that lived below my uncle's house. And so he wanted to leave in the 6th inning because of traffic. As I found when I researched the game 20, 30 years later, it was a game that the Miracle Mets clinched the Eastern Division title, and apparently the ticket that I had given back to him was worth a lot of money. So the frustration with traffic happened then. But I'm going to tell you a story now on why, I have a love-hate relationship with traffic. My dad was a devout Steeler fan. The Steelers, to him, were what the Pirates are to us today. Just a bad, lousy franchise who was the worst team in the NFL for more times than not. One playoff appearance in their first 40 seasons, and that was kind of a questionable thing to begin with in 1947. But, Dad, they finally had this fantastic year in 1972. December 23rd, he buys tickets for my brother and I to the first playoff game in Pittsburgh since 1947 against the Oakland Raiders. And Dad was a sore loser and hated traffic worse than Uncle Ed. So, Steelers are winning it. Let's face it, if not for the last play, it was a lousy game. It was just a lousy defensive struggle, but the Steelers look like there's no way they're going to lose this game. It's 6-0 late. Kenny Stabler's in, a young quarterback, and yet to forge his Hall of Fame career. But the thing about Kenny Stabler is, at 60 years old, I am faster than Kenny Stabler was as a rookie. Slowest quarterback I think I've ever seen. Somehow, if you remember the play, he somehow rips through the Steeler defense for a 32-yard unbelievable run as every Steeler is out of position. And the Raiders go ahead 7-6, to which my dad swears a few times and then, come on kids, let's beat the traffic. So we get down to gate C and we hear this tremendous roar. Back then the games were blacked out until the next day. So we're on the gate thinking Roy Girella must have somehow kicked a field goal to win this game. Walk back. It's not until the next day that I see the Immaculate Reception, a game I was at. Just as I said, a love-hate relationship with traffic. Although the opener after my Uncle Ed passed away in 2016, my sons and I went. Now, luckily, the Pirates were down by like 13 runs at the time. But we did get up, and we left the game in the 6th inning in honor of him. And You know, those were just some things. And then there was the day I cursed the team I loved the most, the Pittsburgh Pirates. You remember October 17, 1979? You guys remember what happened that day?
The World Series?
Pirates won the World Series. So I'm a freshman at Duquesne, almost flunking out of college at the time, because I was down at Three River Stadium every night instead of studying. But I made enough just to squeak by that first semester. But so they win. We're at a hotel because we get no cable service in Duquesne, where I was. So we had friends who lived in a hotel down the street. We went there. Idiot friend of mine, after Stargell hits a home run, decides to crawl on the roof and start screaming. To which the hotel management came up and kicked us out of the hotel. So we run down. I don't know if you guys ever knew of the Carlton House. It was a very ritzy, suit, highfalutin kind of place, and we were in ripped jeans and t-shirts, but luckily they let us come in to watch the ninth inning. So we see Marino catch the ball. We start running down to Market Square, which, believe it or not, there were 3 times as many people for that Pirate win as the Steeler win a few months later. I mean, that's how much people just adored that team in '79. And I turned to my roommate, who I've done a couple books with, and I said to him, Bill, we're going to be able to do this every year. And he looks at me, he's excited. I checked today, 15,538 days later, the Pirates have 9 winning seasons, and their highlights in those 43 years have been the most disastrous, embarrassing loss in the 1992 NLCS Game 7. We'll talk about that a little more because that inspired a book of ours. So not only was that a highlight, but then the unbelievable happened, of course, and you have losing records for 20 seasons. So difficult is that to do? Much easier to win a World Series than to lose 20 consecutive seasons, which no major professional team in North America has done before or since. So we get that highlight, and then the other thing on my wall is when the Pirates win their 82nd game. We're so excited because we've clinched an 82 and 80 season. This is how just bad that team. And at that point in time, my friend turns to me and says, "You jinxed them." On October 17, 1979. But who knew at that time? I mean, they were a huge favorite the next year. But I mean, those are kind of some fun stories. But I mean, we're lucky to live in an area that we live in. I mean, you look around. Cleveland hasn't won a World Series since 1948, won championship since 1964. We have, what, 5, 10, 16, 25 titles if you just include the 3 major teams in Pitt football. One of my books was inspired by that Pitt football team, who in the 1920s and 30s were the Alabama of college football. And they did so by paying their players enough that they could get married, have a house, and support their families. And, so if you think it can't be clean and win a championship now, it was even worse back then. So bad were they by doing that. I mean, they were a tremendous team. In 19 years, I think Jock Sutherland, the coach then, greatest coach in Pittsburgh history, only lost 12 games. They won 5 national championships. But Notre Dame wouldn't play us. Nobody in the Big Ten would play us. The chancellor of the school was embarrassed and basically told Jock Sutherland, "I'm taking your money away, but you still have to play all the tough teams." So Jock said it's either or, either I get the money or I go. And then Pitt goes into a nasty losing streak for so many years. But if any of you were around for 1976, which is the subject of my last book, what a tremendous fun time. Again, unfortunately, it was so many years ago, but that is one thing I would love to relive again, a national championship in football, because it's just so tough, especially with the way football's set up now. But But it's been fun. I only started this, believe it or not, in 2001. I had been a journalism major who left school with really no confidence. Ended up working in retail, which I've been in retail management for 34 years with Kohl's department store now. But I had no confidence, and I always wanted to write a book. I kept telling my wife I had this idea about writing a book about the people that stayed behind in World War II to play baseball. 90% of the stars, it would be, Mike Piazza in the 90s, and Gary Sheffield and Derek Jeter all went to war and left the games to the Jimmy Andersons, if you recall him, the Pirate pitcher. That was basically what baseball was at that point in time. I just never had the confidence. So my wife, who I'm sure at this point in time is sick of hearing this, looks at me dead in the face and says, either you send that in or you shut up and never mention this again. So luckily I sent it in, they bought it. 6 months later, I got somebody had read it from a company called Sports Publishing Inc. And they were wanting to have somebody write a book about the Pittsburgh Pirate Encyclopedia, which was really what threw our career off. And luckily to this day, we are working on our 36th and 37th book now. Next one that'll come out will be about the city section of Oakland, which between 1909 and 1960 housed Forbes Field, the Duquesne Gardens, Pitt Stadium, and the Fitzgerald Fieldhouse, which basically meant for those 50 years, if there was a sporting event in Pittsburgh, it was within, it took me a half hour, I walked it before I wrote the book. So basically walking distance from any place, which I thought, wow, that's would have been pretty cool. In fact, the day Forbes Field opened, Jack Johnson, the heavyweight champion, fought at Duquesne Gardens. So there's a story in the press that basically tells about how many fans would just walk from a Pirate game over to Duquesne Gardens so they could watch the heavyweight champion of the world. And to me, it would have been just a great thing to have available to me. But one book we did that I'm going to really concentrate on tonight because it houses the many things that happen here first. It's called Pittsburgh First. I did it with a group of friends from Duquesne. We call ourselves the Alliance of Esteemed Duquesne Scribes. But it was friends I went to school with. I know a few of them wanted to get published, so I figured we split the chapters up and we got on there. Do you know how many birthplaces the Western Pennsylvania is for? Anybody know? You got the birthplace of football, professional football, which happened in Pittsburgh with Pudge Heffelfinger, who was paid $500 to play a football game for a Pittsburgh team, right about where Three River Stadium was. So that is the first professional football player ever played, happened in Pittsburgh. And one thing we're researching now, with what we have and what we're trying to prove, and I just finished an article for the Westmoreland Historical Magazine, which will come out in a few months, is the first two all-professional teams were Latrobe in 1897 in Greensboro. They have trouble validating the Greensboro thing. Latrobe and Jeanette, they originally thought that was the first professional football game. A guy named John Brillier, Latrobe paid $10 because their quarterback, Eddie Graham, was committed to playing baseball for Greensboro that day. So he was an IUP quarterback. I forget what they called IUP back then. But they brought him in for $10 in expenses. Nobody back then would admit to being a professional football player because all the good teams were amateur. And if you were found to be professional, you were basically kicked out. In fact, Pudge Heffelfinger, they never knew about him until the 1960s when they found a ledger that paid him $500 for his appearance in 1892, which predated the Jeanette Latrobe game by 5 years. But for years, they found out, or they thought John Brillier, he embraced it. He loved the fact he was a celebrity. The NFL was not the cash cow it is today. They were fighting with the AAFC, which was a league where the Cleveland Browns, Baltimore Colts, and San Francisco 49ers came from. and they were fighting from supremacy, so they made an agreement with Latrobe because of John Braylor in that game that the Pro Football Hall of Fame would be in Latrobe. The trick was Latrobe had to pay for it because they didn't have the money. Latrobe just fumbled around for 2 decades. John Braylor still had his fame. In fact, he passed away in 1960 before they found this new contract, which was, that would have killed him. He loved being that celebrity. So he luckily died without ever knowing somebody outdated him. But in 1960, without raising the money, somebody, the Timken Steel Company in Canton, gave the NFL $300,000, and that's how the NFL built the Hall of Fame in Canton instead of Latrobe. So had somebody donated the money in those 2 decades, right now, in fact, Latrobe Stadium was built for the Hall of Fame. That's why it's so big. The Steelers would play exhibition games there to try to raise money. So we are the home of that, and if this Latrobe-Greensburg thing works out, and where Offutt Field is right now, is where the first all-professional football game, I believe, I'm pretty sure about it, would have been played. So it gives you that. Birthplace of professional hockey was thought to be in Michigan. Turns out, only a couple of years ago, a guy found newspaper articles that Pittsburgh was paying hockey players a few years before Michigan did. So you have the birthplace of professional hockey is here. You have the birthplace of the U.S. Olympic team, which was put together by the guy who was the coach for the first NHL team in Pittsburgh, the Pirates in the 20s. He was charged with putting together the first Olympic team, which I believe was 1920 in Antwerp. It was in the Summer Olympics. So you have the birthplace of Olympic hockey. Birthplace of college basketball happened at Geneva. James Naismith, who founded the game, was part of bringing that to college basketball. Vanderbilt tries to argue that because they played an exhibition game a day early before a Geneva game. Now, Geneva had this, and they showed me their articles, and that was part of the Pittsburgh first book that predated Vanderbilt's claim for years. So you go to Geneva, you have a plaque for the birthplace of professional or college basketball. So that's a lot of stuff in the area that people don't realize that started here. First college football game. If you guys have been to Waynesburg College or University, that's where the first college football game was ever telecast nationally. Of course, we have Pitt, West Virginia, first college football game on the radio. We have Pirates, Philadelphia. Predated it by a year, first baseball game on the radio. So there's just so much. I mean, we all know about what's the first night game in World Series history. Was the 1971 World Series. So it just makes, the history goes beyond championships if you look in here. We go through this in this book, and this, to me, out of the books I've done, this is probably the one I had the most fun in. This was where we found out about the numbers that you talked about. Washington and Jefferson had claimed, Pitt had originally claimed to be the first to wear numbers in 1908. Washington and Jefferson then had a claim that they wore them in 1907. And this is what the NCAA recognized. They recognized Wisconsin and Chicago as being the first 2 teams to wear a uniform in 1912. So I called up the guy because I don't know how to do this chapter. Do I give Pitt the credit? Do I give Washington and Jefferson? So I call up the AD, and I said, who validated this? They told me his name. He's a good historian. I said, did he get anything out of the paper? Well, we tried to find that paper, and we couldn't find anything in it, but he's validated it. So that's the first thing you want to hear, is nobody has any substantial proof that these things take place, which is what we enjoy on this thing. So I spent probably a couple of days going through every Pitt game, and finally in 1905, there's a big article that Pitt and I believe it was Mount Union, but that Pitt, they went in song and verse about this wearing the numbers. It was basically done so they could sell more programs. because there was their head of what would have been, in essence, their head of media at the time, printed their programs. And he wanted to sell them because people weren't buying them. So now that you have to have the program to see whose number is who, all of a sudden it made him a lot of money selling these programs. But for us, we were able to, the guys at Pitt were thrilled because, they had claimed this, then they pulled it out of their media guide, and now it's back in because they sent them all the proof, sent the NCAA the proof. They haven't said anything about WJ since, but they haven't commented on it. But I mean, if you go through the papers, and that's how we like to write the stories. We like, instead of maybe going through a more modern day book, I like going through the papers, and I like developing the story as it kind of takes place, and that's where you see some of these things. Duquesne has Cumberland Posey, the great owner of the Homestead Grays, was the first African American to play for Duquesne basketball. He was a great basketball player, led the two teams in the cities to 4 or 5 national championships. And now he's the only man in the baseball and basketball Hall of Fame because of it. Chuck Cooper, of course, who I was blessed to be able to write his autobiography. Because if you look down at Chuck Cooper, here's the first guy ever drafted African American in the NBA's history. He was picked 14th by the Boston Celtics in 1950. And he didn't like the notoriety. I mean, he would avoid it at all costs. Even after he was out of the league, he eventually became, this man was driven. He became the first head of a department in the city, African American to head a department in the city. Became one of the first executives at PNC, African American executives. So a guy that was driven. He taught himself Spanish in a matter of days so he could get a job in out east near where Lehigh is. He taught himself to play the trombone. I mean, he just was an amazing person that people didn't know about. So as you looked into him, this guy, he wasn't allowed to shoot. He wasn't allowed to be in the offensive, and that frustrated the heck out of him. But he was the best defensive player in the NBA at the time, and just ended up with a nice career, but nobody really knew about it. So I was, his son, Chuck III, is head of a foundation which helps kids with secondary degrees in college. And we just started talking about it, and he asked if I'd write the book on his father. And I looked at him, and the first thing out of my mouth was, well, I hope you have a lot of pictures, because I doubt there's much there on them. And boy, I was wrong. I mean, we were able, it consumed me probably for 7 months, because there was so much in the Boston papers about him. Such a great man, a great charitable man, who was also the toughest basketball player. He was the first guy to hold out in Celtic history. At the time, if you held out and didn't sign your contract, 9 times out of 10 you were out of the league. They didn't need you. And he held out because he wanted paid fairly. He wanted to be paid, but people with his production were paid. And you touch one of his teammates, he would put you down. I mean, he was just an amazing person. So, you look at guys like that, and you just find, peeling the onions of them and finding out more about them. It's just fascinating. The Duquesne basketball team. If you know college basketball, Duquesne's one of the worst, if not the worst, programs in the country. I graduated in 1983, and as an alumnus, I still have never seen them in an NCAA tournament, their last one being 1977. But in the 30s through 1960, they won the national championship in 1955 because they were a team that wasn't afraid to recruit African American players like Dave Ricketts, who you guys may know as baseball players. Dave being coach for the Pirates in '71, but they were tremendous basketball players. And Duquesne was one of the few people recruiting African Americans, and it led them to, they were comparable today, they were the Duke of their time. Constantly in the finals of the NIT, which was a better tournament back then than the NCAA because half of the country was independents, and the NCAA wouldn't invite independents to the tournament. So they went through a tremendous record with that because of that. Some great players. Jim Tucker, who had the quickest, unfortunately just passed away, had the quickest triple-double. He had a triple-double in under 17 minutes, which is just an unbelievable mark. And it held until, I think it was only a couple years ago. Guy, he escapes my mind. He plays Denver. He was the MVP last year. But anyways, he was the guy who finally broke the record 50 years later. You know, Dick Ricketts, like Hugo Green would have been players of the year if they had it. They were both drafted back-to-back in consecutive season, first in the NBA draft. The only time that ever happened has yet to happen since. So, you know, you see that happening that we like to remind people of. You know, certainly we like to remind people of what the Steelers were like, what the Penguins were like when I was in college in the 70s. If you're hockey fans back then, for $5, we'd get the highest seat at the Civic Arena. And then you would walk down, give the guy another $5, you'd be on the glass within 5 minutes because nobody was at the arena. I mean, they were an embarrassment until they tanked in 1983, which we tell the story in our Civic Arena book. They were on a collision course for last place with the New Jersey Devils. Back and forth they went. So Roberto Romano was the goalie. He had 2 good games in a row. So Eddie Johnston, the GM, pulled him and sent him to the minors and pulled up a guy who was stinking in the minors so they would lose. And you know, it was just hilarious how they would go about losing these games. There were a group of players that had no business being in the NHL, but they ended up getting a few less points than the Devils. And they drafted Mario Lemieux with that draft because of it. So it was the most important losses that any team ever had, because without Mario Lemieux, who knows if anything else happens. And you know, we may be sitting on no Stanley Cups at this point. I mean, we were able to go on a streak where we got him, we got Yager, because Yager lied to every NHL club and said he wasn't leaving Czechoslovakia except for Craig Patrick, because he wanted to play with Mario. So that's how Penguins went in and got him with the 4th pick in the draft. You know, and then of course the luck of no NHL season, so you decide to have a flip of the coin, or cards or whatever they did, lottery system, and miraculously get Sid Crosby, which they had as much of a chance as the best team in the league getting. So, get that. Again, people didn't think you could get Malkin out of Russia. So, that's how they end up with, it was almost verbatim the same situation that Lemieux and Yager went in. So you look at that, and that's 3 of the top 10 players in the history of the league in our city in the last 40 years. I mean, that just is tremendous. And only a couple years before that, I mean, how many times were in 1974, they had 89 points and of course became one of the first teams to blow a 3-0 lead in the playoff. It had only happened once in professional sports before that. And they were padlocked at the end of that year by the IRS because they couldn't pay their taxes. So we almost lost them then. Luckily, Eddie DeBartolo bought them and was there when Mario was drafted. But even Mario almost sent the city. It was about 3 or 4 times the Penguins almost went to other cities. And I mean, my kids who were born at that point are dumbfounded when I tell them that, because right now, what they have, like 600 straight sellouts. So I mean, you think back to times like that, but every generation has their sad loser. Unfortunately, if you're young now and you're a baseball fan, it's the Pirates, but they have the best farm system in baseball right now. And Ben Cherington, I believe in thoroughly. So you're going to make the claim here, not next year, but the year after. You will see them at least compete for the postseason. So, I'm sorry?
Sell off
Well, the problem with before, with a small market team like Minnesota, like Oakland, Tampa Bay, you have to build that farm system that you can replace. As much as Bob Nutting is a bad owner, and he's a bad owner, Neil Huntington is the one that destroyed that franchise by not being able to develop players. You have Roberto Clemente as the biggest selling card in Latin America, and he never, Starling Marte was great, but that was the guy before. He never developed a Latin player of his own in all his years that he was there. There's so much talent out there. And it's not a draft situation. You can go sign who you want. In fact, Charrington got the number 2 or 3 player in Latin America in the offseason. So, he's done a tremendous job. That's who killed the Pirates, was Neil Huntington. He had a chance to, and he was getting bankrolled. And it was a pitcher he signed in 2016. Hack, who was he was with Pittsburgh earlier. Who is it? Oh, this was before Archer. Vogelsong. He chooses to sign Vogelsong, who's hurt, and that's where he spent all his money. And you knew at that point in time that they were done. Archer had so many red flags. I didn't mind the original trade, but Shane Baz was their number 1 draft pick who was having a good minor league season. Everybody kept saying, well, I hear rumors Shane Baz is a player to be named later. I'm laughing at it. Who's stupid enough to trade your best outfielder, a guy who was your best minor league pitcher, who's having a few problems, and your number 1 draft pick? Nobody's that stupid. I was wrong. There was somebody that tough, and that probably set the Pirates back. Yeah, it's pretty bad. But just the obsession with sports is just what I love. Sports history, love looking at. Even if I didn't write books, I'd be doing that. My wife shakes her head because down in my basement I have 3 TVs blazing every night with 3 different games on, and. Luckily she's allowed me to keep my man cave so she can have some semblance of a house upstairs. But what were some of your favorite sports moments that kind of got you fired up about sports? Yeah.
When I was 50 years old, I went to see the Pirates at Drew Stadium. Got to see Willie Stargell hit a home run. He was my favorite baseball player. I always loved Willie hitting home runs. Ball Prince and Coley.
Oh yeah.
And kiss it goodbye.
Oh yeah. Well, you made Willie mad when Willie owned his chicken restaurant. Exactly. Willie didn't give him permission to do that at first.
We actually had Manny Sandiego speak here years ago.
Oh, Manny. Yeah, he's such a good guy.
My walls, you got to go to Fort Steele, and I got to watch Artie Hattis.
Wow.
Yeah, that was wow.
That would have been
That
awesome.
ball was, how can you catch something?
Yeah.
He blocked it with his body, but never did anything.
Oh, man. He had such movement, you're right.
That was good.
Who was a faster player than people realize. I've seen clips of him, and I'm a little dumbfounded by his speed. He's a little faster than I would have thought he would have been, because he was a heavy-set guy. Yes.
I saw 78, I went down to church group to see Pitt Panthers playing 78. Navy was ready to score. They fumble the football, and somebody from Pitt takes it and runs all the way across and scores a touchdown.
Wow.
Do you remember that or not?
That would fire up. I remember that game. That was a good team.
And one of my buddies,
Yeah.
when they was ready to score, he decided to use the bathroom and he missed the play. He said he watched it on TV. I tell him, I watched it, I was there to see it.
Yeah, you gotta see it live. Gotta see it live. That's classic. That's classic. What else do we have? What other fun moments?
Harvey Hanks no hitter.
Yeah, like the
You got to see,
I remember now.
that would have
Because here it
been fun.
comes
That would have been fun. Greatest game ever pitched, and I don't understand how people don't give him credit for that. Nobody in the history of the game has had 12 perfect games. Yeah. It's why I laugh when people rate another home run over Mazeroskis.
There was a pitcher the other week threw probably 6 or 7 perfect innings. They took him out.
Oh, yeah.
80-something.
Kershaw, yeah. 80 pitches.
Yeah. Perfect game.
That hurt.
Take him out.
That hurt. Yeah, you gotta let the guy go through it at that point. It's a regular season game. That's what hurts about the game.
Just throw him into it, let him in.
Right.
They want to put in the setup.
Yeah.
That was your stuff, man.
I mean, and you have the greatest team in baseball. This one game isn't gonna hurt you if somehow he gets a little tough, but no, that was irritating, but yeah, had its 12 perfect innings. How do you do that?
Before our time, the Bay hit his final 3 home runs.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
Yeah.
And the last was found by, remember Gus Miller newsstand in Oakland? It was right down from Pitt State. It was a famous newsstand down there, but he was the one that found the last ball. And I know it rolled, but he said it was about 600 feet from home plate. First ball ever over right field, if I'm not, right field roof, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. That is a fun, in fact, I put that in my greatest Pirate games, even though, you know, wasn't much. No, they won the game.
They won the game.
They did win the game, but it wasn't much of a game, but the fact Babe Ruth hit 3 home runs, his last 3, that makes it amazing. Yeah, absolutely. What else we have? Anything else? I think it's always a pleasure to talk about Pittsburgh sports and you know, something, you know, I have a podcast now with a friend of mine. Basically, it's based off the phone conversations we have about sports every week. I mean, it's, you know, we have a nice amount of books on the edge, so I'm hoping I can get through another 30 or 40 more before I hang it up. So, but thank you all very much. Yes?
One of the worst things, I'm watching the World Series, and I started counting former Pirates. And I get up to 7 former Pirates in the World Series.
Yeah.
The league.
Just let go. No, that's, I'm hopeful for this new regime because he paid a lot of money for Ben Cherington. And Ben Cherington was very hot commodity when they signed him. So I'm banking on he got some promises because he could have gone. He's the one that built that Toronto team, which is one of the best hitting teams in the game right now. I'm sorry? Oh, we built Boston's World Championship, 1913. That was his farm system. So I'm hoping. I mean, you know, we could all be disappointed again at some point, but there was nothing better than being in a World Series. I mean, Stanley Cup, Super Bowls, nothing better than being in a World Series. The history, the tradition, and just so irritating that it's been so long since we've been in one. Especially when we should have been in one. Andy Vince always tells the story that he told Barry Bonds where to play on that last play of the '92 NLCS, and Bonds refused to go there. Gave him the finger. So, yeah. So I mean, had Bonds moved, in fact, the run doesn't score because he's right where the ball is. It might drop in for a hit, but they don't score on that play. And at that point in time, I believe they used up all their everyday players, so they would have had to use a pitcher in the field, and Pittsburgh would have had the advantage of that gone. And Mike LaValliere, who I interviewed probably about 2 weeks ago, makes the claim if they had instant replay now, he said there's no way Sid Bream was saved. He said he had to play blocked, and that would have been overturned for sure. I refuse to watch the replay, so I'm never going to know. But, you know, again.
Of course, too, would be a massive conception if they had some replay in those days.
Boy, that'd be a tough one. I played it in slow motion so many times from so many different angles I pull up. Yeah. I mean, I don't think they overturn it. Well, as John Madden used to say, the referees would fear for their lives if they had overturned it. So, no, he always said, the one referee asked, "Is there security here?" And somebody said no. And it's a touchdown.
I got to attend the All-Star game in '94, a rare National League win because the American League lost. But what was it became an embarrassingly long celebration for Jim Leland. His team was just mantled by then. Local fans hadn't forgotten 90, 91, 92.
Right.
When they announced Jim Leland as National League manager, it went on, I don't know, like you probably heard, 5-6 minutes.
Yeah.
Or Leland's like, sit down, you're going to embarrass me.
Yeah.
That was a thank you for what you connected.
For what he did, yeah, certainly a great manager. But, well, that game, I probably said that was the best non-playoff game, non-postseason game I saw at the stadium. Just excitement, as you said, they hadn't won in a while. It was a lot better in 2006, that was a dog game. But, yeah, that was exciting when Lou scores. Or no, it's Quinn that scored, right? Although we had the hit. Yeah. So, Moises. It was Felipe's son, who was given away by Pirate Management. Yeah. Of course, they got Zane Smith for that, and he was a pivotal part of those championship teams. So it wasn't all destruction. But is there anything else? Anybody else? Well, thank you very much. I got some books there, 20 piece, if anybody's interested, that I brought with me. I thank you very much. If you have any questions, if you have my name on there, it's dfinoli@aol.com. Feel free to answer them. Yes, sir.
Hey, listen up. Bonus for you guys that stayed. Because we used a caterer tonight, we get to keep the extra food.
That was a good question.
So, it's lined up on the same table. I do have individual holders. Take food home with you.
But we're doing it alphabetical by first name backwards. So Arlo's at the end.
Hey, before we go, let's have a real fast business meeting. There's going to be some changes next year. I was shocked when I seen the price for the trophies. The price for the trophies was just $5 under $500 this year. That was an increase of $170 over 3 years ago. So we got to make some changes because, and talking to Dan tonight, we charge each team $40. 40 times 12 is $480. We're $20 in the hole just for the trophies. So there's going to be some there's going to be some changes probably next year to look at. We got to. It's just getting out of hand. And even Brad was talking about probably the price of darts are going to go up next year. You know, I mean, it just continues to go up and up and up and up. And
Right now, I can't get them.
you can't get darts.
They're thinking by somewhere they may have some, right now they don't.
Oh, geez.
So hang on to take care of the ones you have.
What did they say that
They didn't quote me price. Not just assuming the shipping's up, materials are up. I paid almost $1,000 for a month. I can't believe it's not gonna go up. That was 2 years ago. It's been over 2 years we had those. Nope. I guess 1,200.
Looking through the stats, I saw Phil Condon.
So just to be aware, there might be some changes
Adult
next year.
sign, is this Phil Condon?
Trophies
It would
and
be like
stuff.
50?
We're not sure where we're going.
Oh, it's his son, yeah, okay, yeah. And I worked with Phil, I grew up across the street from Phil's family. I went to school with his brother, I went